Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Analyze Scripts, where once again we are super excited to talk about Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the third Harry Potter movie, with my favorite teacher from residency, Dr. Zheala Qayyum. She is a child and adolescent psychiatrist extraordinaire who currently works at Harvard. I met her at my time at Yale, and she is just such a lovely person and loves to use fairy tales to talk about child development. So, this is the third part in our Harry Potter series, and we are so happy that you're joining us again.
I am delighted and thank you so very much. This has now grown to be something I really look forward to every
Oh,
time. And I have the best people to share my thoughts with. So thank you so much for having me again.
oh my gosh, we look forward to it too.
Thank you.
We're always like that after we record one, we're like, okay, how many weeks should we wait to reach out again? Because we don't want to overwhelm her. Maybe like a month.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh,
So
so just to,
Katrina and I were
mm,
saying, that this was each of our favorite Harry Potter book and movie, and where does it fall for you, Zheala?
I felt this was where I sensed things changing a little bit.
mhm,
It was where things got a bit darker. And
mhm,
I also thought that they're growing up. So it was a bit of a shift for me. I'm not sure how I felt about it because there's this part of you that wants people to hold on to that childhood magic
yes, I
uh,
get that.
and protect them as much as possible from the realities of the world. And I think here things got started to get real.
Mhm.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I remember when this movie came out back in 2004, it's pretty noticeable that the three main characters look older than they did in the first two movies. And I believe that's because they shot the first two movies like back to back. So they were about the same age. And now in this movie, they're meant to be 13 years old and they look more mature. They're
Mhm.
taller, they're starting to develop. And we see that mirrored in their characters as well. But I think it's just so interesting how that just kind of like happened to work out. And I also believe the first two movies were directed by Christopher Columbus, whereas this one was directed by Alfonso Cuarón. And so it does have a different feel. I think even the way they shot it looks different to me. Like you said, it seems darker. The content's a bit darker. And even Dumbledore's different. There's a new actor playing Dumbledore. So it is different. And you know, the sort of plot of the movie doesn't follow the same plot as the first two, where there's like that epic battle at the end with Voldemort, right? Like we don't really even see Voldemort in this one. I really feel like this is the one laying the groundwork, laying the stage for kind of the rest of the series. And what like a beautiful metaphor for your teenage years.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I remember being even like, you know, dare I say, attracted to like all of the characters all of a sudden, which I think speaks to like my own development. Like that
Yeah.
one scene where Ron and all of the in the boys' dormitory, they're all taking that like jelly bean that makes them like,
Mhm.
roar or whatever. And I was like, oh my gosh, like him roaring was,
Wow.
whoa. And then
Ron.
Draco,
Didn't know you were capable of that.
was like I thought cute in this movie. Like everyone just seemed more like developed,
Hmm.
and I think I aged with them, which I know I've said before. But that to me, I
Right.
remember watching it even this time, and I was like, oh, like I remember that feeling. That's so weird.
Yeah, even Harry is, like, more I remember I always had
Yeah.
such a crush on Oliver Wood, the,
Yes.
the captain of the Quidditch
Yeah.
team.
Yeah. Even in the books, I think he was like supposed to be cute. So I remember
Mhm,
reading them. But
mhm,
yeah,
mhm.
they are developing.
And, and also, like you said, it doesn't follow the previous theme of movies that came before the books. This one was not so overt. I think in the epic battle between Voldemort, there's no Voldemort,
Hmm.
and yet you have a different villain
Mhm.
who was sort of hidden. And so I think one of the general difference in this movie is it's almost like a mystery.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of like, how is Hermione showing up to all these classes? To
Yes.
like
I loved that.
who really killed Harry's parents, or who betrayed the Potters, and why
Mm-hmm.
is Crookshanks attacking Scabbers all of a sudden? I mean, that was
Mm-hmm.
not something that we saw before. They've been together for 2 years,
Right.
but why is that happening all of a sudden? Why is Harry seeing the Grim? So there was this
Mm-hmm.
almost like mystery feel to the whole movie
Mm-hmm.
this time around.
Mm.
And talking about the bigger picture, I think some of the things that I felt the main message was things aren't what they seem,
Right.
and
Mm-hmm.
people aren't what they seem. So don't make assumptions.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Lupin sort of teaches Harry that in his own way, but it also takes it a step further when we talk about like they're maturing and they're older. Is they're showing people as complex
Right.
and people as flawed,
Right.
which I think we'll talk a little more about. But I think that general sense that even in a perfect magical world or a world of magic, it's just like the Muggle world where, there are marginalized people. And we've talked about this before. There is classism, there is racism in its own way. Um, there are institutional structures that are oppressive, like the legal system that is imprisoning Sirius for something that he didn't do for 12 years, and
Right.
is letting Harry go because he's popular, even though he uses
Mm-hmm.
speech magic. And
Mm-hmm.
then on the contrasting side, Buckbeak is is sentenced to be executed
Right.
for
Mm-hmm.
something very sort of minimal, just
Mm-hmm.
because the Malfoys are influential and they have power.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And interestingly, like we've talked about with the first two movies, Harry Potter just does such a magnificent job starting to explore these concepts in a way children can understand. So again, I watched this with both of my kids who are 7 and 5. I wasn't sure. I didn't really want to because I know they each get darker and darker, and I was worried they were going to have nightmares about the Dementors. But they like really want to watch Harry Potter. Like they love it. And I love their commentary the whole time we're watching it because they really pick up on this stuff. Like when they were talking about, Buckbeak getting executed, my kids were like aghast. They kept saying like, but Draco, it's
Yeah.
Draco's fault. It's not Buckbeak's fault. But just like the fact that small kids can really like wrap their head around these concepts is pretty like fascinating to me.
Mhm.
And now watching it in adulthood, preparing for this podcast and watching it with them because now they're huge fans. I'm like watching them more than I'm watching the movie. I'm just like, wow, this is fascinating to watch kids
Mhm.
watch this movie.
Yeah. And I think too, like with Buckbeak, you do see like before the time turning happens with all of them, like I think you go through all of these emotions, like being really sad that this unjust, unfair event
Mm-hmm.
happened, and like nobody could do anything about it. And then watching it at the last half hour when they're all kind of reliving it and they come in and they are making these changes and setting him free, and like, but I think it's almost like you have to go through in a way that a child can understand like the unjust part first to understand like how important then the after part is when they can step
Mm-hmm.
in and do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's still like there's, relatively speaking, like a happy, satisfying ending, but like there is much more of the dark theme. What it makes me think of Twilight, the last movie, when they have the battle, and like you don't know yet that Alice, it's her vision that she's showing him, and they like, spoiler alert, all die, but then it like all of a sudden you're like, oh, it doesn't happen, but that's such an important part of the movie, and like you kind of
Mm-hmm.
need to see that fall, that pain, the suffering, before you can like see the good, which I just
Yeah.
think is an interesting theme again about how the books are evolving in the movies. But,
And how it's children who are sort of achieving that justice for
yes.
Buckbeak, but also they have to go about it in a way that, you know, is outside the law
Mm-hmm.
or the bounds of, what the black and white view of what's right versus wrong. Like, yeah, this whole movie, we start seeing the gray like literally on our screens it's darker, but then
Yeah.
also like
Mm.
they're all grappling with the good and bad in each of them. You know, we see Hermione punch Draco and say like that felt really good. We see Harry really grappling with that. We see them not really sure what to make of Sirius and Lupin and all these people they trust, Snape, you know, and even things like that. I think it's just starting to suggest like the world isn't so black and white, so cut and dry. And like, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if it was? But as you get older, you realize it's not.
Mhm. Mm.
And then coming, I think that's part of their own identity formation as well, about who they are, what do they stand for, like Hermione punching Draco, um, and also the identity of other people, that it's not so black and white, that people aren't all good or all bad.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you hold that complexity within yourself when you're still in the process of figuring out who you are?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do you, I think it's all those lines of development for identity, like your moral development, your social development. Uh, what do you stand for?
Mm-hmm.
And again, that theme of things aren't always what they seem, people aren't always what they seem. So, in terms of identity formation, appreciating that maybe the identity of a werewolf that's ostracized and unwelcome, or Sirius Black, who's this, second hand of Voldemort and single handedly caused the Potters to die, that is not the actual identity thrust upon somebody,
Mm.
but part of your own developments to figure out what you stand for, and can you discern who people are for yourself and make that decision about who they are.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Right.
think
And
of the beginning of the
mhm.
movie with Harry and his aunt, who's just being so, so cruel to him. I mean,
Abusive, awful.
and getting off on it. It seems like she's like
Oh.
smirking when he finally kind of explodes, and she's like waiting for it. And then, before she blows up into a balloon, you like see her put her finger out, and she's like about to kind of lay into him again. And like Harry, it appears like has not exploded yet on maybe the Dursleys, on his aunt, that everyone's shocked, no one can believe it. And it's really the verbal part first, like enough, stop saying this. That's
Mm-hmm.
not true. That really shows his, I think, like growth and ability to have some confidence that I don't know if he would have had if he was still with the Dursleys, in whatever
Full
capacity, and
time.
not gone off to school, and like known that his parents were these amazing people in the wizarding world who were respected and who were well liked. And who were important in the defeat of the Dark Lord. And I think you can see his development to kind of be like, well, I'm curious who I am, and how do I feel about this, and what am I going to do, and him kind of on his journey, which I think is very appropriate with like adolescence, kind of finding your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we don't do, most of the time we don't do it well when we're young, but it's all like just how we learn. And I think that is just such an important part of his development of really being more in charge of his life, which he never was until Hogwarts,
Mm-hmm.
and he's able to do that at home too, which I think is really nice to see.
And even the night bus that he gets on
Mm,
to, right? Like when he decides to leave the Dursleys for good. I love the night bus. And I think it's
me
also such a
too.
fun metaphor for adolescence. Are just like all over the place and like, it's like so fast and so loud. And like, you don't really know what's going on. Like, I feel like it's just like puberty, like on our screens, you know?
Mhm. I like that
Exactly.
idea.
And also, again, something, that theme of, like, the one that bus goes between the two other vehicles,
Yes, it squeezes.
it squeezes through and everybody's like, distorted. It, just that feeling of, this is so near, it could be right here, it's coexisting, and we all wish,
Mm-hmm.
there was that magical element in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes us relive that. And to your point, Portia, just the ability to go to Hogwarts is such an important developmental task for this age for him, because we talked about identity formation is about knowing who you are, where you come from, so you can figure out who you're going to become. And around this time, Harry now has a good sense of who his parents were. He did not know that before. There were parents who were, to our Aunt Marge's point, all the ways the Dursleys berated the parents and put them down, and he finally knows that that's not who they are. So he's developing a sense of where he's coming from, and then going to Hogwarts, being in Quidditch, having good friends, now building these relationships with mentors. He's able to do that. So you see that sense of competence and confidence come back and help him sort of grow into his own and separate from the Dursleys much more readily. Like, he left this time.
Right. Of his own accord.
Because he could. He could let it go because now he has a sense of belonging somewhere else. And that's the time where peer relationships and peer support become so important in adolescence and the adolescent identity formation, that it's just, I think, very timely and beautifully illustrated around, like, you're 13 now, and you're sort of the people who make you feel worth something, that's shifting a little bit.
Yeah, Zheala, I was hoping you could spend a little time just telling our listeners about that psychological stage in adolescence of identity formation. We've talked about it quite a bit already, but I'm sure this is something you see a lot in your work. I know in my work, treating more parents, there's a lot of pain on their side of when their kids start pulling away, and how do you kind of sit with that? And then I think it is also a time where teenagers are super vulnerable. And we see that even in this movie, right? Like, he left the Dursleys. Luckily, the night bus showed up. But what if it hadn't? That is when, kids can be really vulnerable.
And to your point, that's a very, I think, important thing, that he has connections. And I think we're faced with this dilemma of now where kids are not feeling connected, or they're getting bullied, and that sense of shifting onto your peers for your self-esteem and feeling like you're competent socially and academically, it's changing from parents onto peers. And that shift is sometimes very difficult for parents, when I was your entire world, and now you want to hang out with these people. And yet developmentally it's appropriate, because that's where your sense of self-worth. Are you admired by other peers? Are there romantic relationships? These are all important things. And then also values. And I think we kind of see that highlighted in the movie as well, where Harry, Hermione, and Ron had to shift what they thought about Sirius Black, and now really see what's happening with Peter Pettigrew. And Harry
pretty quickly
had the opportunity to hurt him, and he chose not to. So your sense of moral development and who you are and what values you stand for, you have to start thinking about those things. And some of them come from your parents or your caregivers, or society at large, and your religious community and other affiliations that tell you what's right and wrong. But it's up to the adolescent to say, this is pick and choose time. What resonates with me? And they might be trying on different things at this time to say, do I fit with this group? Am I really like this? And you see that shifting a lot till they settle in and says, I've tried all these things. This is who I really am. And this is what I stand for. And those might be parental values or community values, but this is what I've internalized, and now they belong to me. So this is what I stand for. So it's a whole process of trying out things. And sometimes those trying out things can be dangerous and impulsive and difficult for parents. But that's where your role as a parent changes during adolescence, from being someone who is a nurturer and a direct caregiver to now a supervisor. That I'm giving you autonomy within limits, but I'm going to make sure you're okay, and then you can come back to me and we can talk about things, so I can provide you some guidance. But now it is much more not hands-on like before, and it's a little more distant like supervision.
Yeah, the power of peers is so important. And I think that's where, sometimes even being a parent, you can feel maybe more anxiety or less anxiety depending on like what you perceive your child's friends to be. I think a scene that I really think is valuable to kind of reflect on is when Draco and his friends are making fun of Harry for passing out on the train. And Harry's upset, and Ron kind of like puts his arm around Harry and is like, just forget it, and like kind of pulls him back into the table. And I think like another peer group, which again wouldn't be wildly like out of nowhere, could have been like, we're gonna fight, we're gonna exchange words, we're all gonna stand up and escalate things.
Mhm.
And really the support that Ron was able to give him, and then to kind of pull back into like, okay, you're good, this is your family, like this is your support system here, really just sets up the power of peers, because it could have gone, and then it would have been more on Harry to choose in the moment. But it was just, I think it was just a wonderful scene of good peer support and the power of
Mm.
connection, and when it works. And I think that's of course what every parent wants and what every teen wants too. But it just shows different friend groups and how impacted Draco is by his friend group. And would he be the way he was if he wasn't
Mm.
with the peers who were like that, who just power differentials. I mean, it's kind of fascinating to watch like groups,
Mhm.
especially of teens kind of navigating throughout the school and what they're like.
And you both work more often with adolescents. So do you feel like this stuff is shifting or changing with the evolution of social media and the access to peers online or, distantly in other countries or cultures or things like that? And with COVID and like all the isolation that adolescents went through at such a formative time, and now we're trying to come out of it.
Zheala, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that's one of the main reasons we see kids struggling is when they don't have this sense of connection.
Hmm.
And in person or being able to socialize with your peers in person is a skill that has to be practiced, which a lot
Yeah.
of our young folks have not had the opportunity to because of the pandemic. So, in
Hmm.
some ways, there was this delay or lag that they're catching up. And before, I think one of the biggest challenges I see kids with nowadays is before, if someone was bullying you like Draco, you leave it at school and then you go
Right.
home. And
Right.
now everything follows them constantly,
Constantly.
24/7. Someone can even take a screenshot if you take something down. It's out there, it follows them. There's this constant state of anxiety
Hmm.
for kids about what's happening and who's saying something. And to the point of like Ron pulling him back and saying it's okay. Nowadays, it can be that your own group turns on you, or someone
Yeah.
joins in, or says something that is not as supportive, and then a child is so much more susceptible to feeling all alone. And
Yeah.
the sense of being alone, I'm just seeing that more and more. I don't know about you, Portia, but
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the anxiety levels to me feel so significant, with just
Mhm.
it's having so many more things to like worry about. And I think there's nuance, of course, with like every age, but or generation, I guess I'd say. But even just like the language and the meaning, it's so much more like, okay, he viewed my stories. Like that means something. Or he swiped, he looked at the first one, but then he swiped, so he didn't view all of them. Like, what does that mean? It's like there's all of
Mm.
this language and extra meaning now that happens, right, when you're at home, kind of also at times by yourself, then having to process these things alone. So it's like, part of,
Mm.
even if it's like positive or negative or neutral interactions online, typically if you're going home or it's at night, like you're not with a peer group to like giggle about it or cry about it or process it or figure it out. It's like you're kind of left on your own to
Yeah.
establish what things mean. And I think that's also really hard. um and you're right, just the time of access. And I think of course there's positive sides. People talk to safely, ideally,
Mhm.
teens, peers, like throughout the world, which has helped some clients I have seen. But also, I think just the level of loneliness is significant. Even
Yeah.
when you have access to so many people on your phone, it's like, why are you more lonely? This was supposed to help, and I just feel like it doesn't. It just makes you more isolated.
And interestingly, I feel like I worry about this a lot with my own children. And I'm seeing a lot of this so much earlier than I anticipated. Like, even just the stuff they're exposed to. Like, I hate YouTube. Like, and you know what? You can't get it off your smart TV. Like, I have tried, my husband has tried, we've talked to other parents, we try to delete it and it like comes back as this app. There's like something about YouTube where you can't like just get it off. Um, but it's just weird to hear your very young kids already like parroting, you know, make sure you smash that like button, or like the things that they've heard, like the YouTube people some of them are fine and it can be educational, but I don't like that already at such a young age they're thinking about likes, and it's been very weird to see them like reenact that in their own play. And so already I just feel like as a parent, I'm trying to be really thoughtful and almost like hyper vigilant about what they're being exposed to, because I'm like, I don't want that to start planting this seed that somehow like that is the number of likes is tied to your self-worth, right? And I think even like with us in our podcast, we're always like, ooh, how many people listened? And like you do think about it and you do get that feedback and it can feel good. But also, I think Portia and I are fully formed adults by now. And we can keep in mind, like, even if this episode didn't get as many as we hoped, we're still really proud of it. But how does like a 7-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, how do they do that? I think it's like really challenging.
Mm.
And it's constant.
Mm-hmm.
That's what terrifies me.
Don't take a break.
Yeah. Oh, I can't even imagine what that's like.
So maybe your fear for the boggart would be social media and your children.
Yeah, it really is. Or, I'm always worried about predators
Mm-hmm.
online, like finding them, it's just like terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I rotated through, the inpatient child and adolescent units, this was like a decade ago by now. So many kids were admitted for significant depression, suicide attempts, anxiety about stuff happening online. So I can't even imagine what it's like, nowadays going through COVID. It's a lot. It's a lot.
And Harry, like imagine, I'm just thinking of like the magic world going through a pandemic as well. And like him, if depending on what year it was, like him returning to the Dursleys for like years. On the bad end of it, and just like some of those kids who were home, without access to regular food, without access, obviously, of course, we're talking to peers, but just like without access to positive, like adults in their life and structure, and boarding school like Hogwarts is very structured, and I think it's it's not for everyone. It's great for some, it's not for others, but I think for Harry, like it was so important for him to be there, and for other kids it's so important for them to be at school, just to maintain kind of like their well-being.
100%. Oh gosh. Oh my gosh, can you imagine Harry, Ron, and Hermione going through COVID? Oh, I don't even want to. I'm sure there's a fan fiction somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe. But it just tells you the power of charismatic adults in your life.
For good and bad.
Right? I mean, for children who have no one, for so many of them, that it was that coach, that teacher, that someone in school
that Dr. Q.
Oh, I'm so honored. But that one that is what your person.
Yeah.
That you feel connected to, which I think Lupin does a really nice job of here in trying to be parental but not keeping his secrets. Because I think there's a time where he almost like wants to hug and comfort Harry and he doesn't do it. But sort of teaching about how do you protect yourself when he saw how impacted he was by the Dementors, and helping him face his fears. And we saw the boggarts and the CBT in action.
Yes.
So you kind of see how great teachers connect.
Yes.
And the importance of that in our lives.
And I think that Harry Lupin relationship, as you were saying that, I was thinking like That sounds like an ideal therapeutic relationship too, right? That even as like therapists, sometimes you might want to hug or comfort your patient, but you don't because,
Mhm.
or depending on the situation, what's going on, right? But you have to have those healthy boundaries. But right, like seeing Lupin help the students, bear witness to their deepest, darkest fears and um, catch it, check it, change it, to use CBT lingo was really cool.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely like a reframe and with the twist of humor. I think,
As a
if we
defense mechanism.
yeah, if we
Yeah.
take it like being just silly at first, like it's like a great, wonderful like exercise that like, would be
Hmm.
cool to replicate in like a therapy session. And like, ooh, like you don't know these students and what their trauma history is and what's like
Right.
really
It's kind of
going
dangerous.
on. And with too fast in therapy, right? Or doing things before somebody's ready like is really dangerous and can do
Yes.
more harm. So I think it's also about like, right, like knowing when you're ready, knowing when the patient's ready,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
guiding them gently with the supports that they need, which like for Ron it was like helpful. The spider, you could almost say like phobia, and then all of
Hmm.
a sudden there's the
Yes.
rollerblades, and his like their legs go out and it's like, yeah, everyone's laughing and having fun
Haha.
and it's supportive,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
Neville felt a little though like more intense. I'm surprised that it wasn't maybe even Bellatrix
Mhm.
Mm.
that came out.
Yeah.
So Snape was like less, severe, and then it turned into his grandmother, which was silly. But then, you kind of see Lupin looking to the side when Harry steps up, and we learn later that he thought maybe Voldemort would appear. But
Mhm.
like
Hmm.
good on Lupin to kind of immediately step in and kind of shut it down, because like it wouldn't have been helpful for the other students, and also
Hmm.
like Harry was not prepared. He didn't have the skill yet, the spell he
Yes.
didn't understand. And then Lupin really gently and wonderfully does talk to him later. It feels like you were saying, Katrina, like a therapist role of
Hmm.
normalizing it for Harry, offering some information, so educating, and then also like
Hmm.
just providing support and tools and skills. So that really was
Right.
kind of like highlighting I don't know, like a good therapy
Yeah.
session. I like that you said
Yeah.
that. Mhm.
And I think if we think about the children looking at the boggarts as like trauma therapy,
Mhm.
you see how a good therapist will keep sort of their pulse on how the patient is doing and maybe intervene when things are getting a little too deep too quickly or something. Like if I think it can be dangerous to engage in trauma therapy without a skilled
Mhm.
practitioner, right? Because then you could see Voldemort or the Dementor and not know what to do with it. And so
Mhm.
then you see Lupin intervene. That might be when we say, like, okay, let's do some grounding work. Let's do some breath work. Let's, use our five senses. Let's bring it on back in, check in how you're doing. And then interestingly, I loved that you also saw Lupin see his greatest fear, which was
Mhm.
the moon, and how he used this skill. He's like modeling using the skill. And if we're thinking of Lupin as a therapist, it's also just kind of beautiful, right? Because therapists are also humans and we bring all of our own stuff with us, and you have to be regulating that at the same time. And when you can kind of model that with your patient in a way that keeps the focus on them, so beautiful.
Mm.
So it's just really cool scene overall.
Mm.
Oh, I loved it. I use it a lot for like showing this is CBT in action
Yeah.
for our trainees. But I also felt like he highlighted the most important thing when we're treating any trauma or anxieties, which is you can't avoid.
Mhm.
You
Yes.
have to face your fear. And guess what? You don't have to do it alone.
Alone. Yes.
You have someone with you, and you'll be safe, or someone will be there to keep you safe throughout the
Mhm.
process.
Right. Whether it's Lupin, the therapist, whether it's your classmates,
Yes.
who is your support system? How can you lean on them?
Mhm. Yeah. And Harry was really trusting of Lupin, and I think he ends up at the end also still being able to trust him. But all of a sudden, like, you see Harry's face in the three of them when they're in the Shrieking Shack, when Lupin hugs Sirius Black and just like, we trusted
Yes.
you. Hermione's
Right. You
so
feel betrayed.
angry and betrayed. And then, they have the information kind of come back around. But Lupin is just, I think, a wonderful person to all of them and is really supportive. Kind of like makes me think of Hagrid. Hagrid's like a little bit less, you know, good at it, but he's so supportive and caring, even if he doesn't have like the great words to say. He sometimes feels more like a peer here and there, but other times, you know, when he's comforting, I think it was book 2, when he's comforting Hermione after they're explaining to Harry what like a mudblood is, he's so sweet and so compassionate. And like I think that's just what everyone needs, but I just love it so much for Harry over and over again, seeing these compassionate, caring adults who can show up for you, who can be secure, who you can count on.
Yeah. But then I think like how traumatizing for them to see him transform into the werewolf and get so violent and be out of control. That's such a personification of just like the quote unquote badness coming out and how dangerous that is. Zheala, I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your thoughts of them witnessing that.
Yeah, I thought it was like he saw it. So he saw somebody at almost like his worst, right? This is the worst where Lupin can be. And yet, I think that's the development and identity part. That I can see you at your worst and it still doesn't change what I think of you. And I think that is that maturity of identity formation, that I can be secure in somewhat of who I am to accept you as you are. And that is the, I think, one of the changes that happens in how adolescents to early adulthood relationships change, where an adolescent is looking at their own identity based on, if you're like this, I'll become like this, right? When they're in close relationships. Oh, you're a nerd, I'll act like a nerd. You see it in so many movies.
Mean Girls. I keep thinking about Mean Girls today.
They pretend to, but they're not pretending. They're taking on that identity, like I said, trying on, do I fit this way? And then as you grow up and you're in a close relationship, it's like you can be who you are, and that's perfectly fine. And I can be who I am, and that's perfectly fine too. And we can still, be close and love each other. But I don't have to change who I am. And I think that's something you see modeled here, which is in loving, respectful relationships. You can understand the complexity of people. You can appreciate the gray. You can value it. And that one negative thing does not negate all the positive things, even if it can be dangerous. And I think that's where good judgment comes in to know is the danger worth risking or not.
Right. Because how do they conceptualize Lupin compared to Draco? Some might say like Lupin, when he's a werewolf, is more dangerous, and yet he feels safer, I think, to them than someone like Draco.
And you also see Lupin's vulnerabilities. Like he comes in scratched, and he sort of represents this person who's marginalized. Like, I think he says something that people wouldn't like someone like me teaching their parents wouldn't like someone like me teaching their children. And when he says, I'm leaving, and I think before he closes the door, he says, I'm used to it. So, and it's like someone and this could be anyone, like anyone who is marginalized for any reason, whether religious, racial. This is how people treated people with AIDS once upon a time, or anyone who's socially ostracized for any reason. And it also tells you that he values, like there'll always be these few people who stand up, I think to your point, Katrina, earlier, and do what's right. And these are the kids, but they're doing that with adult, almost supervision in a way. That Dumbledore didn't just, he gave them guidance about how much time to turn. And that go and do this, even though it's outside the box. And similarly, I think that outside the box thinking comes up for, I think one of the bigger themes I felt for the movie was so much of what impacts our life has nothing to do with us. Similarly for Harry, although this whole series is about Harry and his friends, but it's literally what, Messrs. Mooney, Padfoot, Prongs, and Wormtail did that was impacting them now. And who they were and how that sort of impacted him losing his parents and the life that he had and the sort of the ordeals he had to go through in this book. That is about you, but there's so much in this world that isn't about you that will still impact you.
Yeah.
Getting to appreciate that, I thought, was really nicely done.
Yeah, and I wonder why Harry isn't just like so angry at the world. I mean, I think in some of the later books he does get angrier for a bit of time. But gosh, so much has happened to him that he didn't ask for.
That's true.
But he
And-
still has agency.
Right. And he's growing into that agency. And I think we really start to see that here when he starts taking the reins. You know, he grabs the wand, he thinks about hurting Peter Pettigrew, then he doesn't, but he's really like, he is taking the reins a bit.
Expelliarmusing Snape, like, I mean, that in theory is a huge risk. We know he doesn't like Snape, but he also knows that it's wrong to attack a teacher. But really just needing in that moment, like, this is more important. Like, I think even if it was a impulsive, like, I think still he made the decision quickly that this information is more important to me than Snape getting in the way of it. And I'm going to take control of this situation and get what I need, which I think we often like don't really see him do. We don't see him. He's not selfish, he's like very open, but we see that very appropriately for his age too, kind of like taking the reins, like, no, I need to know this. I'm doing this for me. And like that's okay to do finally.
But also like, was it okay to do? Because like, what if it had gone poorly? Ron and Hermione were right there. Like,
Yeah. It was a risk for sure.
Yeah. I have a question. Were either of you wondering, like, why is Dumbledore having the children do all this? I don't know. I guess there was a part of me that was like, do all their parents know what's going on at this school? Because like every year they go, it's like so dangerous. And if like my daughter came home and was like, guess what? I got this little thing and I flip it around. And so I got to like go back in time and like fix it. I would be like, what? That's not your responsibility. There's some part of me that was like, this is a lot of responsibility to put on these kids.
I think that's a big theme, like even in the later books, like a lot of just discourse and talking, like, not, I guess there's some of it in the books and movies, but like I think there's a lot of just like in the fandom of being like, is Dumbledore good or bad? Like, is he selfish or not? Like, what is his intention? What is his purpose? Obviously at the end, which we will get to of the series, but like I think that, some of those conversations that Harry sees with Dumbledore and Snape are really just like makes you think. I don't know. I feel like I go back and forth between thinking that I certainly did not think that in childhood, watching or reading, but now I'm like, is Dumbledore like ultimately good and wants the best for Harry, or is it more of like the good for all with the sacrifice of few? I don't know.
Yeah, and he's not all good either.
Right.
Even Dumbledore,
Yeah,
that's true.
Complexity. Because I also wonder, how much constrained are we as we grow to be adults, and particularly when we're in positions of power or leadership, and the scrutiny that comes with it? That was it really Dumbledore using the kids to do something outside the box because he wouldn't be able to? But I also feel like poor Harry had no parents to come after Dumbledore.
Right.
There was,
and even like Hermione, her parents are Muggles, so they might not really get it.
And Ron's parents, I think, are like almost like Dumbledore's like godlike, like this perfect leader, whereas like none of them really were questioning. I don't think, of the three of them, like Harry didn't have parents, Hermione's, I think, just have the, lacking privilege of knowledge. And then Ron's parents really like idealizing Dumbledore. So like no one was really asking questions.
And I think in the real world, that can be dangerous. Again, I feel like I keep talking about predators today, but I don't think Dumbledore's a predator. I'll be clear. But in the real world, if there's a coach or a teacher or something that has like unchecked power, that's where things can get like dangerous.
And I don't think it's unique to Harry Potter that there's this theme of defiance for adolescents, of doing something dangerous and risky and adventurous as part of you discovering yourself in this hero's journey of who you're supposed to be, that I think gets somewhat glorified in stories and books about, doing dangerous things and having good results. And yet we know in the real world, dangerous things don't always come to good results.
Right.
And that is a risk that parents are always aware of.
Right. Well, so as we start wrapping up, I would like to spend a little time talking about the dementors and Harry conjuring the Patronus, because those feel like really important elements to this movie. Zheala, do you mind sharing with us your conceptualization of the dementors and their kiss?
Oh gosh. I mean, weren't they the foulest creatures that ever walked the earth?
They're scary looking.
They are. But beyond that, it was just such a lovely sort of parallel between the Patronus and the Dementors. That for whatever there is, there's always something else to counter it. And the Dementor's kiss, I mean, how awful can it get that your soul is sucked out, your heart and your brain will continue to work, but you'll be left with nothing but a shell of who you are. You have no sense of self. And the only thing that remains is your worst memory. And just how the Dementors were used in prisons to drive people mad. And on the flip side, you had the Patronus that was everything it's like a manifestation of thought into matter that bring a happy memory and make it a shield. And that's what the Dementor will feed off of, and it won't hurt them because it's just a projection. But what I felt most was that is what sustains us. It is hope. It is moments that we cherish. Like, I don't think anyone has long episodes of, okay, this thing happened in my life. When we think about memories, they're just flashes and moments that we collect. And they are powerful. So I know I said this once before, but it's just that being loved and having that sense that you mean something to people or you have some self-worth is so powerful. And that, even though the Dementors made him think about the screaming woman, and that's all he could initially hear. And yet when he had to conjure his Patronus, it was that sense of being protected, like the same framing and restructuring of what it actually meant. It was not the most horrific moment in his life, but it was also the moment of utmost love that he's ever received.
Right.
And I think that would be the way I would conceptualize it, is that to be loved and that sense of being loved is probably the most powerful magic that we have in our world, that we carry with us during our lifetime.
Even in the wizarding world. Yeah, that's so true. And I loved how at the end, Harry came to realize that it wasn't his dad who protected him at the end, as lovely as that would have been. And of course, he wants that to be true more than anything. But it was actually himself. I really loved that. But even with that realization, there is a sadness to it, and a reminder, like, it can't be your dad. It has to be you.
And having the belief in himself that he, never knew that he could conjure a Patronus of that magnitude. And knowing and believing that he could was why he could do it. And, I don't think that's typical for us to see ourselves, really, but that having that inner strength and belief that I can do this, so we do, I think is so powerful. And the opposite is, really feeling like we can't do anything, or having maybe more of a negative perception, limiting self-beliefs, but the opposite of that is empowering. And when we see someone who's really struggling with confidence and self-worth and having a sense of who they are and having a lot of self-limiting beliefs, I think just for me, the kind of the light and the dark really was like a metaphor for like isolation, kind of depression, like the hardest parts of our life, grief, trauma, and then the Patronus being what really looking and getting from within ourselves, from our own like what we are capable of when we have support, and we believe we can. And just how powerful that is probably why I really, really, really love this movie.
Yeah, same. Right. And that's what I think we want to work on, like with our patients. I'm imagining, especially teenagers who maybe are stuck in an unsupportive home environment. You just want to just hold on to that and use that, and like you can get out eventually. You need sometimes you need someone to see that in you too.
Yes.
And reflect it back to you and keep reminding you of that. I think especially when you're young.
The sort of self-worth you see in other people's eyes for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do appreciate the metaphor of dementors and depression, or anxiety or fear, because that's what they feed on. But also, one thing I was struck by was how the dementors were actually the guards of Azkaban, and how the Ministry of Magic would use something so dark to control people, oppress the powerless, and show that they were powerful. That it I think has a significant parallel to our own world.
Yeah, right. Even like the good people in the Ministry of Magic have this like sadistic part to them.
Yeah.
And then
we see that
to bring them to Hogwarts.
Yeah, in this place
Again, if
where
I was a
like
parent,
pure.
I'd be like,
yeah.
What?
And they're not really in control of them, which we then kind of go on to see. But it's very, and we see what that does to Sirius Black, right? Who we know, is innocent. And how it really, it to me feels like torture, it's cruel and unusual punishment. It makes me think of when people are in solitary confinement for very long periods of time. It really damages your psyche.
And why wouldn't it?
Exactly.
For anyone,
So I think even using the dementors as kind of paralleling what happens in our criminal justice system is just, it's an interesting perspective that I think, I didn't think about until later on adulthood watching this movie. But it's how rich these books and these movies are with themes that I think every time you watch it, you kind of get something else from it or notice something. But yeah, I don't know. I did want to mention Dumbledore's quote, which he says while he's kind of talking and warning the students at the beginning of the school year about the dementors and being careful and just don't mess with them really. And then he says, as a reminder, happiness can be found even in the darkest of times when one only remembers to turn the light on. And I think we've kind of spoke about that in many ways today with just whether you get it from someone else or you can find it in yourself. We can access more positive perspectives or just good. Sometimes it's hard to and takes a lot of work. Other times it's just our experience. But I just like the idea that it's accessible. Sometimes we just need help getting it, but it is accessible for everyone.
And sometimes that help does come in the form of medication, and that's okay. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you or you're weak or you have some kind of moral failing. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
And that, there is strength and courage to be found with other people. That you don't have to be alone.
Yeah. My favorite part of the books, right? Harry and his friends. That's how he does it. That's how they all do.
Well, this was so lovely. Dr. Q, any final thoughts before we wrap up? I'm just in such a good mood right now.
No, I think this was the perfect note to end on, that, it is togetherness and that sense of connectedness that we build that sustains us, and hope, and that sense of being loved.
And speaking of love, as we continue on our Harry Potter journey, we're going to keep seeing the love grow between Ron and Hermione, which I'm really excited about as we get into the fourth movie. Zheala, we hope that you'll come back and join us.
Love to.
And we really appreciate you making the time for us today, and as always. And if you want to hear more of Zheala and her take on Harry Potter, please listen to our prior episodes and tune in the future. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Analyze Scripts Podcast. And you can find Zheala at Zeek, Zheequue. Did I spell it right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. She makes some pretty awesome Lego creations, which I love. And we'll see you again next time.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.